Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan, and this is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, Donald Trump's tariffs against Mexico and Canada are on hold for now, but the US trade dispute with China rumbles on. So what's behind Trump's tariff threats, and could they trigger a global trade war? India's economy is losing steam after a period of roaring economic growth. The government is giving tax relief to the middle classes, among other measures to help revive the economy. But will the budget work? And the Chinese AI chatbot DeepSeek has stunned the world and roiled stock markets. Could China beat US tech giants at their own game? And where does that leave the global race for artificial intelligence? So, who blinked first, the US or Canada and Mexico? President Donald Trump has delayed imposing tariffs on his closest trading allies by a month after guarantees were given on border security and fentanyl trafficking. Canada and Mexico may have delayed a trade war that could have impacted North America and beyond, but Trump's supporters say his plan to leverage the American economy to force concessions from other nations has notched a win. On a different front, China has hit back against Trump's additional tariffs on Chinese products with its own measures due to take effect on February 10th. That could give some time for the world's two largest economies to step back from an escalating trade dispute, as Kulsum Sharif reports.
US President Donald Trump is claiming an early victory in an emerging trade war with his North American neighbors. He delayed tariffs on Canada and Mexico for a month, just as the 25% import taxes were due to start on February the 4th. It follows last-minute deals with leaders of the two countries. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau agreed to monitor his shared border with the US to clamp down on migration and the flow of the drug fentanyl. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum also agreed to Trump's demands.
They've agreed to put in 10,000 soldiers permanently, like forever, 10,000 soldiers at their side of the border and stop fentanyl and illegal aliens from coming into our country. They have a big incentive to do.
But trade tensions with China have escalated, even as the leaders of the world's two largest economies are expected to speak. Beijing announced additional tariffs on some American products minutes after additional US tariffs of 10% on Chinese imports came into effect. They include coal and gas, crude oil, agricultural machinery, and some automobiles. China has also taken its fight to the World Trade Organization with a lawsuit against its rival.
We are firmly opposed to this unwarranted increase, and we do believe that this is in violation of the WTO rules. So that's why China is filing a complaint. And let me also emphasize that there is no winner in a trade war.
Trump says the tariffs are to pressure China into halting the flow of illicit drugs into the country. Trade experts say the move is expected to have a significant impact on certain sectors within the Chinese economy.
There is going to be a first-time tax on people who ship goods under $800 per shipment, and that's called de minimis. So if you are Shein, if you're Temu, if you're others who rely on small package delivery that is under a certain amount, you're getting hit with first-time tariffs, not 10%, could even be up to 55%.
The US is the largest goods importer in the world. In 2022, the value of imported goods in the country touched $3.2 trillion. But Trump is promising to promote homegrown manufacturers and protect domestic industries by imposing tariffs. The threat of taxes on imported goods rattled stock markets and sent shockwaves through the global economy. But it's already yielded results for the Trump administration. Kulsum Sharif, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
So why is Trump in favor of tariffs, and what would be their cost if and once they come into effect? Well, simply put, import tariffs are taxes placed on goods imported from other countries, and it's American companies that pay the tariffs to the US Treasury. A portion of that cost could be passed on to American consumers in the form of higher prices. But tariffs can hurt foreign nations by making their products pricier and harder to sell abroad. Trump says that tariffs could help to boost American manufacturing and end what he describes as unfair trade practices. He's also said that they're intended to stop the flow of undocumented immigrants and illegal drugs into the United States. But Trump has also made it clear he would impose tariffs to get other governments to give him what he wants. Many economists say that the measures will increase inflation in the US. For example, the average American car price could increase by around $3,000. The move could cost the average American household up to $1,200 in annual purchasing power. There are also fears the tariffs could throw Canada and Mexico into recession. Well, some experts say that Trump's sweeping tariffs threaten to fracture the global trading system and the world economic order, but that could end up in Beijing's favour. Philippe Legrand is a political economist and senior visiting fellow at the London School of Economics European Institute, and he joins us now from London. Good to see you, Philippe. So who blinked first, Canada and Mexico or the US? Was the threat genuine, or was the whole thing pure theatre?
That's a good question, and I think we've only seen the first act of what's going to be a long and eventful play. I mean, clearly, Canada and Mexico in the short term have managed to give Trump enough for him to retract his tariffs. So you could say that Trump blinked first, but I think that Trump is going to be coming back for more. This is just the first of his many erratic acts that we're going to see over the next 4 years.
Interesting that you say erratic. If Trump does indeed go ahead and eventually imposes tariffs on Canada and Mexico and the EU, as well as the additional tariffs on China, is that going to spark a trade war? And what would that look like?
Yes, I think we are going to have a global trade war. I think that Trump is itching for a fight. And I think that his strategy, insofar as he has one, seems to be that you soften up small countries as a means of threatening the bigger prize, which is China and to a lesser extent the European Union. And actually, I think that strategy is flawed. First of all, because he flip-flops so much. He has so many different objectives that he's trying to pursue, whether it's border control or fentanyl or the trade deficit or manufacturing regrowth in the US. And so what he ends up doing is creating chaos and animosity towards the US. And I think that China, while it's prepared to bear some degree of economic pain from the onslaught that Trump is doubtless about to unleash, actually, from a global perspective, from a long-term perspective, we'll be thinking, well, if we are in a global competition with the US for economic dominance, and then actually you're pushing not just neutral countries, but even allies into our hands. And you're seeing the Canadians, for example, who send most of their oil and most of their trade to the US, now exploring other options like exporting more to China in case Trump comes back with some more crazy tariffs.
So what you're saying is you could foresee circumstances in which China managed to come out on top in any trade war, in that Trump might have shot himself and the US in the foot by doing this.
I think so, yes. I think, the big advantage the United States has always had over any geopolitical rivals is not only that it's rich and powerful, and therefore that people want to get close to it, but also that it's been a good, reliable ally and partner. And you can't get a much more reliable ally than Canada. And yet even that is not enough to protect them from, ridiculous insults, claiming that the United States might even occupy Canada and make it the 51st state, and unleashing at least the threat of massive tariffs, which would do huge economic harm to the Canadian economy and to Canadian jobs. So, with friends like Donald Trump, you might think, well, I don't want to be a friend of Donald Trump. I want to get cozy over with China.
He says the word tariffs is his favorite in the dictionary. Could you also foresee circumstances where Trump uses the threat of tariffs or actually imposes them to browbeat, as you say, not just his adversaries, but his allies too, into doing what he wants, not just economically, but politically too?
Sure, that's one of the ways in which he is particularly erratic and dangerous. So you saw that successfully he threatened Colombia with massive tariffs so that it continued taking plane loads of unwanted migrants from the US. And in that case, the threat succeeded. In other cases, he has threatened, for example, massive tariffs on Denmark unless it ceded control of Greenland to the United States. And that is a threat that, if it is followed through, there is absolutely no way in which Denmark could actually back down on something like that. And in which case you start getting into these crazy scenarios where would actually Trump threaten to go to war with a NATO ally, Denmark? We're in uncharted territory, and the only person that wins, the only people who are winning from this is China, because China seems like a reliable, responsible partner, open for trade and unthreatening to its potential allies.
And here we are throwing our hands up in horror at this word tariffs and its possible implications. Just to play devil's advocate for a moment, are they actually a bad thing if used responsibly?
Well, there are some limited economic cases in which tariffs can be justified, but imposing very large, sudden tariffs for all sorts of unjustified reasons is extremely costly. It's costly both to the US and to its economic partners. It depresses growth. It pushes up inflation. Because it pushes up inflation, it pushes up interest rates. And all of that is bad for the global economy.
Philippe, it's always good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us again.
Great, thank you.
Now, India was touted in recent years as the fastest growing major economy, but the nation is set for its slowest economic expansion in 4 years. To spur economic growth, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government gave India's middle class significant tax breaks in its annual budget. The plan also includes measures to boost agriculture and manufacturing. But critics say little direct support has been given to the millions of Indians without work. So, will the budget help revive the economy? We'll discuss that with our guest shortly. But first, Imran Allah Khan reports.
There will be no income tax payable up to income of 12 lakh rupees.
A major relief for millions of taxpayers in India. The government has exempted people earning up to nearly $14,000 from paying tax. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman also changed other tax rates, which could boost the spending power of the middle class. She also made ownership of a second home easier and slashed duties on cancer drugs and various consumer goods. It comes as the world's fifth largest economy is expected to record its slowest rate of growth in 4 years, due to weak consumer demand, low rates of private investment, and inflation.
This budget continues our government's efforts to A. Accelerate growth, B. Secure inclusive development, C. Invigorate private sector investments, D. Uplift household sentiments, and E. Enhance spending power of India's rising middle class.
The finance minister's apparent generosity is set to cost the government nearly $12 billion in revenue. In the past decade, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has spent funds on building public infrastructure. That spurred India's growth. But now his government must balance pushing economic growth and keeping its spending in check. The finance minister wants to reduce the fiscal deficit to 4.8% this year. Some economists are praising the budget for allocating funds to small businesses.
We now have the first glimmer of hope that we're starting to get, the MSMEs are starting to come back. It's slow, but hopefully if that trend continues, we may get a better balance in terms of income distributions.
Increasing living costs has dented the popularity of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who won a historic third term last year, but with a slim majority. Per capita income is around $2,700 for India's population of 1.4 billion. About one-third of it accounts for the middle class, where unemployment has been a major concern. The finance minister is being criticized for not addressing the issue.
So if you have a salary, you may be paying less tax. But the important question is, what happens if you don't have a salary? Where is the income going to come from for you to benefit from income tax relief? You actually need jobs. Unemployment was not mentioned by the finance minister in her speech.
According to the Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy, youth unemployment was at 7.5% in January. It underscores the challenge of delivering jobs in the world's most populous democracy. Imran Al-Khan, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Jayati Ghosh is an economist and professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts. She joins us now from New Delhi. Jayati, good to have you with us again. Has the government done enough with this budget to get the economy growing again, or at least to get it growing as robustly as it was?
No, I fear not. And you see, this is a particular problem because, as we all know, the global economy is in a very peculiar situation with a lot of uncertainty and with exports threatened for practically every developing country for many, many reasons, not least the Trump administration's various moves. So this was really an important time to emphasize domestic demand. The finance minister tried to do that essentially by providing a big tax cut to the middle classes. But remember, these middle classes in India account for about 3 to 4% of the population. The taxpayers, the ones who pay income taxes, are only 5% of our population. So really, just trying to give a tax cut to those people, the salaried people, is not going to do much for domestic demand.
So is that a political move? What about the unemployed in India? And the unemployment, was 8%, the rate in September last year? What's the government doing about that?
Well, unfortunately, nothing. And it's not just that the unemployment rate is high, it is that there are so many people who are not in the labor force because they actually know there are no jobs out there, so they don't try. They don't even look for work. And that is the real problem. So the government claimed that it had a big success in increasing women's employment. It turns out that most of that increase is unpaid helpers in family enterprises. And that's not employment. They're not getting paid for that. So it's really a very, very bad situation on employment for women in particular, but for young people. And there is a sense of despair and hopelessness that can spill into very many problematic sociopolitical outcomes.
All right, so as an economist, what do you think the government should have done with this budget?
Well, I think it's very obvious, and we've been saying this for some time. The government dramatically needs to increase public spending on basic social services, which are very inadequately provided in India. They provide employment, they improve people's quality of life. We are one of the world's lowest in terms of public health spending per capita and as a share of GDP. Only 1% of GDP spent on public health by both the central and state governments put together. Now, this tax cut, which has given away all this money, if that equivalent amount had been spent on, let's say, the employment scheme, which dramatically increases demand in rural areas and provides employment, of course, relatively unskilled employment, but it does provide, especially to the bottom half of the population. If it had increased health spending and education spending, all of this would have generated more employment, more demand, revived mass consumption demand, which has been collapsing in the country. And that in turn would have generated more investment.
As you said, there are factors that are affecting economies all over the world right now. What are the specific ones that are ailing India's economy in particular?
Well, I think our problem really is that the government over the past 10 years decided that it could focus on somehow expanding external demand, relying on export-led growth rather than a potentially huge domestic market. And that failed because really private investment has not picked up. They've given huge different tax concessions to the private sector, gave away 2% of GDP as tax cuts in 2019, continue to give lots of concessions. They've just given concessions to the middle class. That doesn't help in terms of the mass consumption demand. And that's why private investment has not picked up. So public investment has been trying to meet that gap, but even that has fallen in the last year, and in fact, it's not likely to pick up. That is in a context where we know that the world economy and exports is not going to be an engine of growth, simply because of uncertainty. I mean, forget about whether Trump imposes all the tariffs that he's threatening to impose. The very craziness that has now come about in the global economic situation means that less and less people are likely to invest in export-oriented production simply because you just don't know anymore how exchange rates will move, how tariff rates will move, how supply chains will change.
Jayati, it's always good to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for being with us on Counting the Cost.
Thank you.
President Donald Trump has called it a wake-up call to US tech giants. Industry experts described it as AI's Sputnik moment. The Chinese chatbot launched by DeepSeek has shaken markets, the tech industry, and the prospects of American leadership in artificial intelligence. The startup is believed to have matched the most advanced models from US firms and says it did so for a fraction of the cost and with fewer specialized computer chips that leading AI companies rely on, and by using software which is accessible to everyone. Well, the app quickly dislodged OpenAI's ChatGPT as the most downloaded free app on Apple's US App Store. DeepSeek R1 sparked the largest single-day loss in stock market history, wiping out $1 trillion. The Chinese firm says that it trained its models for $5.6 million, while US-based OpenAI was reported to have spent around $100 million to develop GPT-4. It also says its models were built using NVIDIA's lower-performing H800 chips, developed specifically for the Chinese market. The US has been imposing export controls on advanced chips to China since 2022. Now, DeepSeek's progress on AI comes after President Trump announced the launch of a $500 billion AI initiative led by OpenAI, Oracle, and Japan's SoftBank. Ray Wong is the CEO and principal analyst of Constellation Research, a technology research and advisory firm. He joins us now from the heart of Silicon Valley, Cupertino, California. Ray, great to have you with us. Has China taken the lead in the race for domination in AI?
China's fired the first salvo, which is really about cost. I would say China is definitely one of the leaders in AI. When you look at the three components that you need for AI, you need lots of data, you need a lot of chips, and you need a lot of energy at low cost. Well, China has the energy, it's got the data, but it doesn't have the chips. And so that brings them to the US, which the US has the chips, it has the data, but it doesn't have the energy at low cost. So it's going to be an interesting battle on those fronts. But what China did with DeepSeek, it basically showed that Western AI is too expensive at the current rate. And in order to get to AI that can be democratized and used by everyone, we've got to drive down the cost.
All right. Is there room, though, for two athletes in this race? Will one continue to outpace the other? Will it always be the US versus China in terms of artificial intelligence?
The short answer is it doesn't have to be. There could be a third horse race that comes out, and that really depends on what different countries decide to do in terms of their AI policy. For example, you take KSA, they've done a great job, right, of actually trying to bring AI to the market, but they're going to need a lot more demand. They're going to need a lot more data centers to be able to play in the game. So right now, AI is a very expensive proposition, unlike the internet. AI is centralized, it's closed, there are few players, and it's really expensive. But for AI to break out, we're going to see other players when we get to decentralization, open systems, more players. We'll be able to drive down the price like we did in the internet era. But for now, right now, it is very expensive to lay out that infrastructure, and that's phase one. Phase two is going to come when we talk about software and software capabilities, and that's going to be different than where we are today, talking about chips and data centers.
So is this the beginning of the end for Silicon Valley's dominance in AI? Is that what spooked markets so much?
No, I think what spooked markets was that we have put billions of dollars towards going after artificial general intelligence instead of trying to solve smaller problems that are decentralized. And what we're going to see is a rush to fund decentralized AI that's happening on your devices, AI that's happening at the edge. And that's where that future is going to take us.
Really good to talk to you, Ray. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
South Africa's government has introduced a digital nomad visa for thousands of people, allowing them extended stays in the country. Cape Town is quickly becoming a preferred destination for many of those remote workers. But while the program brings economic and tourism benefits, some Cape Townians say they can no longer afford to live in their city. Famida Miller reports.
With its picture-perfect scenery, good weather and affordable cost of living for international visitors,
this is what I spent working as a digital nomad in Cape Town.
Cape Town is attracting a growing community of remote workers or digital nomads. Aside from a tourist visa, the government's implemented a new visa program that allows them to stay for up to 90 days. Natalie Brooks is from the UK and runs her own business online. She's been working remotely from Cape Town for up to 6 months at a time.
There's lots of money that's coming in for tourism, but also in lots of countries where there's a high digital nomad presence, the locals are getting very frustrated by the impact that it's having, particularly on accommodation. So I think that it's about looking at it in a holistic perspective and making sure that the government is putting in the right steps to manage the influx.
While more than 1 million workers here benefit from the tourism, there are others who say the growing demand for accommodation is making housing for locals more expensive. Hamida Jacobs is the third generation in her family living in this home in Bo-Kaap. She says the demand for housing in a prime location means higher property values, but with it comes unaffordable rates and taxes.
Some people cannot afford to stay in the Bo-Kaap anymore, so they started selling their houses and selling their properties.
The local civic association agrees the cost of living in central areas like this has increased.
And of course the investors that's coming into Bo-Kaap, we can see more and more people buying the properties up and hiring it out for short-term rentals. But there's a negative and there's a positive. The negative is it breaks up the community, and the other thing is it hype up the rental.
By the end of last year, there were more than 23,000 listings on short-term letting site Airbnb. But Airbnb says its research shows that short-term rentals have not reduced the availability of longer-term rentals in the city.
The digital nomad visa is for people who earn more than $40,000 a year. The city authorities say those people tend to look for accommodation in more upmarket areas like this on the Atlantic seaboard, rather than occupying homes in less affluent areas.
Authorities say the lack of affordable accommodation is due to a building backlog. Last year, property prices in Cape Town rose by 30%. That's compared to 8% in the commercial hub Johannesburg. But visitors like Natalie say there has to be a balance.
Would you come back?
100%.
While the growing number of visitors to Cape Town helps boost the economy, the drawback for some is an unaffordable city. Famida Miller, Al Jazeera, Cape Town, South Africa.
And that's our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've seen, get in touch with us. I'm at A Finnegan on X. Try to remember to use the hashtag AJCTC, or you can drop us a line. Countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our email address. As always, there's plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, and there you'll find individual reports, links, and entire editions for you to catch up on. For more insight into global trade, if you haven't already, why not watch our previous episode, Is a New World Economic Order Emerging? But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.